You're listening to Aging Uncensored.
Hey there, welcome back to Aging Uncensored, where we dive into all things aging related. We are honored to have our special guest, Dr. Andrew Duxbury, back and joining us today. And of course, I'm Chaley Lawson. You all know me. How's it going, Andy?
I'm doing relatively well, thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
Good. We've had some really lovely weather the last couple of days.
Yes, I'm from Seattle, so summer to me should be no hotter than 80, and there should be clouds.
I'm in full agreement. I'm from the southeast, and every summer I'm still like, why the hell is it so hot? So, all right. So, we've got you here today, and Andy is a wealth of knowledge, and I think just sees the world in a way that's different than most people, and so that's why we love and adore him so much. And we wanted to talk about Medicare.
Yeah, I'm going to try to explain a bit about Medicare and what it is and why it is. It's a very complex subject, and I've been talking about this to audiences for quite some time, so I've developed an approach to it, which may seem a bit counterintuitive, but it's been a way for people to really understand why it is the way it is. Because a lot of people now look at Medicare and go, my God, this is crazy.
Oh, it is crazy. It's very intimidating.
And so people think, well, what idiot dreamed this up? But no. Medicare was invented by very smart people, but it was invented at a very different time in our history to solve the problems that existed then, which are very different than the problems that exist now. But because it's federal law, in order for it to change, that requires an act of Congress.
Literally.
Literally. And it's kind of difficult to get Congress to do much of anything in recent decades due to some of the dysfunctional politics that go on at the national level. So we're kind of stuck with what it is. So in order to understand that, the first thing I like to say is that I am a geriatrician, and most people have not ever met a geriatrician. I had never met a geriatrician until my third year of internal medicine residency, because we're not very common. And geriatrician comes, also the word geriatrics comes from the Greek, and there are two roots there. The first is geri, which comes from geros, which means old or aged. And the other piece, iatros, means physician or medical practitioner. So it's the medical practice of dealing with older people, which is why it's different than gerontology. And people will throw those terms together synonymously, but they're not. Gerontology basically means the study of aging, and it's more the sociological issues of aging than it is the medical issues.
They complement each other, but certainly
they're
not the same
quite the
thing.
same.
Yeah.
So it's the same basic difference as psychiatry and psychology. The psychiatrist is the medical practitioner. The psychologist is much more broad-based, but is not as involved in the medical aspects or in the use of medications or things of that kind.
Right.
So if we're going to kind of talk about these things, we have to have some definitions that we all understand. And so the first one is age and old. Who is old and who is not? And, well, been a lot of arguing about that one, but let's put it this way. We are 4 months from the very first baby boomers turning 80. And those first year of boomers include individuals such as Goldie Hawn, Bette Midler, Sally Field, Susan Sarandon, Sylvester Stallone, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Liza Minnelli, Tim Curry, Cher, Dolly Parton. When we think of that cadre of individuals, do we think of gray-haired and sitting in their rockers?
No, good Lord, no.
And do we think that they think of themselves
No.
in that way? No,
No one
absolutely not. So there's a huge disconnect coming in society between kind of a chronologic definition of age and a sociologic definition of age, which is being driven by the aging of the baby boom, who, have these very different ideas of what it means to be an older person.
I heard someone tell me about a study recently that was like a marketing study, and it said if you want to market to older adults and just in this setting, let's say 75 and older, you're like, we're going to have pamphlets or marketing materials. You need to have people who are in their late 40s on as the photos, because people don't visualize themselves as a white-haired older adult. Like, they will see that and they will say, that doesn't apply to me.
Exactly. Everybody now kind of looks like what we would kind of think of as 50-ish.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But the federal government has a very specific definition of who is old and who is not written into the Medicare law, which is that you become old on your 65th birthday. This is when you officially become geriatric. So the baby boom are now 15 years beyond that. Mm-hmm. But that's when you are, able to apply for Medicare under kind of standard circumstances. Mm-hmm. People with, certain kinds of illnesses and infirmities can apply earlier, but that's where most people get it.
Yeah.
And so, 65, what is magic about that particular age? The age fairy does not tend to come floating down from the ceiling on the morning of your 65th birthday, and you wake up with gray hair and wrinkles that were not there before.
But you do get a red, white, and blue card.
Yeah, so why do we use that number? Because the majority of 65-year-olds today in our society, don't consider themselves as particularly old. And while there is a subset that are physiologically, impaired and having significant health issues, that's a minority. The vast majority of people at 65, are doing fine.
Yep.
So, where does that number come from? Well, Medicare as a legal entity is closely tied to the Social Security Act.
Yeah.
And initially, the Social Security Act defined old age as happening at the age of 65. So that number carried over. Medicare as a legal entity comes from Johnson's Great Society program. So it passed Congress in 1964 and became law in 1965. Trivia. The first Medicare cards were given to Harry Truman and his wife Bess, because he had long been a champion of health care for the aged through his presidency and his life in politics.
Ah. What did people do before?
Oh, we'll get to that.
Okay.
So in that band of time, in a single congressional session when Johnson was president and the mood of the country was very pro-progressive policies in the wake of the Kennedy assassination and before things started to shift with Vietnam and some of the upheavals of the 60s, almost all of the basic programs that we consider health and welfare all came about at that time. And they were known as the Great Society programs: Medicare, Medicaid, HUD, things like Section 8, food stamps, all arrived at once because it was a war on poverty. And that the assumption was that putting these kinds of programs in place would allow all Americans to live a more productive and life and not fall into poverty, particularly as age and disease kept them from being able to be part of the earning population.
Yeah.
So 1965, we're using 65.
Okay.
Social Security comes earlier. It comes in 1933, 1934 under FDR and the New Deal. And it used 65 as well. So we're now almost 100 years ago at this point, and we're using 65 as being old at that time. Well, where did the U.S. government, the Congress of the 1930s, get 65 from? I mean, some people say, well, they ran, statistical studies on life expectancy. Nah. That's not how legislation gets written. Legislation gets written, as the famous saying goes, let's see how the sausage is made, where you take bits and pieces of all sorts of things and grind it up and mix it together. So they just borrowed it. And they borrowed it from Great Britain, which had a number of years earlier in the 1920s passed what's known as the OAP, the Old Age Pensioner Laws, which had used the age of 65 as being the correct age at which to define somebody as, being appropriate, for retirement and for state support.
What an impact that number has had on our society in the way we view aging and the way everyone's like, especially people who, when they get to their 50, like everybody's got their eye on 65, you know?
It's embedded in our cultural DNA at this point.
Yeah.
Well, and the British, they didn't invent it either. They borrowed it from the French. And the French borrowed it from the Germans. And our story starts in Germany. And it starts much earlier than you might think. It starts in Germany of the 1870s.
Oh, wow.
So the 1870s, in terms of American history, this is the period just after the Civil War. So hoop skirts are turning into bustles, and the men have really bad facial hair. It's that period of time. And what is the great worldwide cultural moment that's going on in Europe in the 1870s? What is Europe reacting to? A lot of people will grab at the Industrial Revolution, but no, that actually happened mainly in the 1820s and 1830s. So we're a couple of generations on from this. We're in the High Victorian period, or we're in the Second Empire in France. And what's going on is this is the age of imperialism. This is the age of Europe carving up the globe. This part's mine, that part's yours. Planting colonies so that they have markets for their goods that their new industrialized economies are producing. And everybody is kind of, racing to build global trade networks and consolidating things. But if we look at Europe, the biggest country in Europe and the biggest economy in Europe, today is Germany, by far. Well, we can all name a lot of ex-British colonies. I mean, there's India and Australia and Canada and on the list goes. We can all name probably a lot of French colonies if we think about it. Algeria and French West Africa and Vietnam. I mean, even Belgium has the Congo, and the Netherlands has the Caribbean islands and Indonesia. So the biggest country, the biggest economy is Germany. Where are the ex-German colonies?
Got me on that one.
Exactly. There are a few. Namibia was German. Tanzania was German. But there's not a lot. And it's because German was late to unify as a modern nation state. Germany, prior to the 1870s, was not Germany. It was all of the little principalities left over from the Holy Roman Empire. It was Thuringia and Westphalia and Schleswig-Holstein and Bavaria and Prussia and all of these other things. And it is not until a guy named Otto von Bismarck comes along in Prussia in the 1860s, known as the Iron Chancellor, that he basically looks at the German people and goes, wake up, we have a common language, a common culture, we're being left in the dust by the rest of Europe in terms of this race to, show how powerful we are on a global scale. We can't compete because we are not unified. sort of like Birmingham today. It's 23 municipalities rather than a single, solidified, city.
Yeah, that's a whole talk in itself.
Well, yeah, but it's one at least that local people will understand because it's that kind of issue. And von Bismarck is very bright, and he knows how to manipulate statecraft and warcraft. And he gets all of the pieces together to get all of Germany united under basically Prussian domination using the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, which the Prussians win. And it's the end of Napoleon III and the Second Empire.
Yeah.
And following that, he has finally a modern nation state. And this modern nation state, which he has to consolidate it. And in order to consolidate it, he has to get the population of Germany looking to Berlin for power and guidance rather than looking to where they used to look, whether that was Hamburg or Dresden or Munich. That the central power is now in Berlin, and that's where decisions are made. So in order to have this very strong central nation state, there's a few things he needs to have. He needs to have a strong military. Well, the Franco-Prussian War kind of gave him that. He has to have a strong civil service that will, collect taxes and administer laws and things of this type. And he comes up with something that has never been done before. He comes up with the idea of the public pension, that an individual is worthy of a pension in age just by being a contributing member of that society. You don't have to have anything special other than, you were part of the society, you contributed to it, and now that you've, hit old age, society will contribute back to you. So he creates what is the first Social Security type program. Brand new idea. Now, pensions are not new. The Roman legionaries had pensions, when they came back from the wars. But the idea that it should be a public good, this was his kind of ingenious new idea. And the German public, ate it up, and it helped solidify this country together into a single entity. Now, von Bismarck is not stupid.
Yeah.
And he says, okay, I've got to figure out how to define age so that people will see folk enjoying this benefit, but at the same time, the Treasury's not going to go broke paying it out. So he had to come up with an idea of how do we draw this line? Well, he went to the actuaries. And at this point, life insurance is almost 200 years old. Life insurance was invented around 1700 in the coffee houses of London.
Wow.
So, there are actuaries. They're really good about understanding how long people live and that. And so he asked the German actuaries at the time to run the numbers, and they crack the numbers and they say, okay, von Bismarck, you need to define your line as being age of
65?
70.
Oh!
The original initial program, as the Germans defined it, defined older age starting at the age of 70.
Oh, wow.
And this is in the 19th century.
Right. And what was the life expectancy?
Yeah, well, life expectancy is interesting because we don't think about life expectancy in quite the right way. Most of the numbers that are thrown around as being life expectancy is life expectancy from birth. And what that number is a calculated statistical average the cohort born in that year can expect to live to. So life expectancy in the United States currently is about 77 and a half, 78. It was higher, but COVID and a few other things have done a number on it the last few years, and it's come down. And that means that babies born in 2025, average lifespan will be 77. If we go back 100 years or so in the United States, and we look at life expectancy from birth in the year 1900, it was about 42.
Mm.
This does not mean people were dying of old age in their 40s.
Right.
It means that lots and lots of young people died, pulling that number way, way
Right.
down. It begins to shoot up after World War II with the introduction of such things as vaccines and antibiotics. So babies and children no longer die in the huge numbers that they did. And that's what really dragged the number down. If you made it through the gamut of childhood, you know, in the late 19th, early 20th century, and you made it to adulthood, you generally lived a fairly normal lifespan. You could look back in your own family trees and see that.
Right.
You know, there's the occasional child that's dying young, but the ones that make it, you know,
Yeah.
they make
do
it.
well. Yeah.
They do okay. So a better concept in terms of understanding how long we live is not life expectancy from birth, but rather life expectancy from, you know, a certain age point. So if we were to use life expectancy from the age of 65, meaning the cohort turning 65 in this year, how much longer can they expect to live? It's roughly 83 for men and 87.5 for women. And that's a much more accurate way of thinking about how long we live rather than the 77.
Gotcha.
Because it removes everybody that dies young and brings
Yeah.
the number down.
That makes sense.
And that number keeps going up. You know, you can do life expectancy from age 80, you know, the first year of the boom, you know, it's going to go up even further from that because you keep winnowing out the people who are dying before. Now, there seem to be certain maximums.
Sure.
As I say, you know, to a lot of my patients, welcome to your uncertain 80s.
That's right.
The majority of people who have access to health care, money, make good life decisions, take care of themselves, make it to 80 in reasonable shape and are generally, you know, capable of, you know, taking care of themselves physically, have most of their cognitive faculties, and you know, they pass 80 okay. The number who pass 90
Yeah.
in that same state is very small.
Yeah.
So, you know, we hit the wall in our 80s, the majority of us.
Yeah.
So going back to where we were in Germany and 70 being defined as being old. So here we are, and this weird idea of the public pension is locked up in Germany. The Germans are weird. We don't want anything to do with them. It doesn't really travel outside of German society. But then something happens. And what happens is von Bismarck, you know, succeeds beyond his wildest dreams. He doesn't see it all, of course. He doesn't live long enough. But in the 2 generations from him putting the new nation state in place until World War I, Germany goes from being the backwater of Europe to the industrial powerhouse of Europe. And so by the time World War I rolls around in 1914, Germany is holding off, you know, Russia on one side and France and England on the other.
Yeah.
And it drags on for years because they've got the capacity to do so. World War I does not go particularly well for the Germans.
Yeah.
And they end up losing the war. And what happens in the aftermath of that war is so completely devastating to Western civilizations that everything changes. I mean, if you look at the Society of Titanic, which is 1912, and the Society of the Great Gatsby, which is 1923, there's 11 years between those two societies. And there's like nothing the same about them.
Totally different.
They're completely different, and that's what World War I does. If you're a Downton Abbey fan, it's what Downton Abbey is actually all about, is about what happens to Britain, you know, in the aftermath of World War I and how everything changes.
Yeah.
Everybody is just appalled at the older generation of statesmen and politicians that have allowed this to happen. So they want these new ideas. They want the old guard out. What happens in Germany with the hideous reparations and that are placed on them with the Treaty of Versailles and the hyperinflation that happens and all the rest of it, is that the German people are so upset with their governance that in order to get the center to hold and to keep the society from falling apart, a number of reforms are passed. And one of the reforms that is passed is a lowering of the age of retirement from 70 to 65. And it was done for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons was to get, people to hang on while we try to right the ship. And the other reason was it gave them a way to get rid of the senior level of the bureaucracy who were all in their late 60s.
Oh.
Okay, you're above retirement age, out! and they, at a fell swoop, were able to remove a whole bunch of people.
Huh.
Well, this idea of we got to try new things is, sweeping across Western societies at this point. And so people are starting to look for new ideas. And they say, there's this public pension thing that's been locked up in Germany. Maybe we should try that.
Yeah.
And so in the late teens, early 20s, it leaps into France, and then it leaps into Britain. It leaps the Atlantic for the first time in 1923. Chile is the first American country that develops a Social Security type public pension system. So the fact that we don't get it for another 10 years after that, we're really quite late. Everybody else has already kind of put this in place by the time it comes to us as Social Security. But that 65 just travels with it because it makes a certain amount of sense at that time for that population in terms of what life expectancy actually was. This was a society pre-antibiotics.
Yeah.
So that's where the 65 comes from. So 21st century American health policy is based on mid-19th century German actuarial figures as modified by the World War I experience.
It's wild.
True.
I mean, that's wild. I never would have assumed that.
Yeah, but that's where it comes from.
All right.
So that's the old part. So let's talk a little bit now about the doctoring part. And, why has every human society that we have, ever discovered, whether that's, just currently existent or in, archaeological record, had some sort of healthcare system? And actually, Margaret Mead said that the first sign of civilization was the fact that a skeleton was discovered where there had been like a broken hip, and there was obvious healing. That other individuals in that group had to have put time and energy into a disabled individual for them to get better. So we've always done it because we're social animals, and our basic unit of survival is not the individual, it's the tribe.
Yeah. Yep.
And which is why, not all of us have to have kids or anything, for life to go on and our genes to come down. They can come down through, collateral branches of that, but we've got to support the tribe.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like older, any adults don't do well alone. Like everyone needs a village of sorts. Yeah. So. Yeah.
And so, we are Cro-Magnons, basically. There's no difference between us and the people who are chasing woolly mammoth across the plains of Europe with a spear. We are the same, biologic beings as them. We haven't, changed. There hasn't been enough time to change who we are physiologically or our genomes all that much. And we've only been living in any kind of civilized society for about 6,000 years. And that's certainly not enough time to change anything about who we are.
Yeah.
And, so we were designed by evolution, to need to, make sure that the tribe goes on. And so the tribe goes on as long as there are successful grandparents. That some people have to have children capable of having children. As long as that's happening, the tribe continues and the genes continue, and that doesn't become an evolutionary dead end. Now, we were nearly wiped out a few times if you look at the evolutionary record,
Yeah.
There were some really bad, narrow escapes there a few 100,000 years ago, but, we made it.
Yeah.
But it means that, how at what age can we become a successful grandparent? Roughly 40. Which is why our bodies work so well until we're roughly 40 or so. And then things start happening because evolution hasn't had time to pick any of those processes out of who we are.
Yeah.
But any of us who's made it to 50 realizes that things don't work quite the way they used to.
Yeah.
Because we're not needed anymore for the tribe to continue. The saber-toothed tiger is supposed to have eaten us up at 43.
As the patient I had one time said, I didn't mean to get this old.
Yeah. So, part and parcel of, of creating the tribe and this tribe's survival is some sort of healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
We have it because people get diseased. And that disease can be an infection, an injury, a metabolic change of some sort, something completely normal like a pregnancy. But the person looks at themselves, I am not who I think I should be, help.
Yeah.
And we create the healthcare system to restore that individual back to who they were pre-morbid as much as we can. And that's how it's always worked. And that's the basic model that exists in every society. And it's the acute care model of medicine. Somebody gets sick, you step in, you make them well.
That's right.
And, we've got thousands and thousands of years of experience with doing this and, knowing how to do it and when we can't do it. And, we've started with basically the healers being priests because they're interceding with the gods, that have brought disease or bad luck or whatever.
Right.
And we still have vestiges of that in the system.
Certainly.
The white coat is priestly garb.
Yep.
We have ceremonial instruments.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
stethoscopes. How much do we learn from a stethoscope these days? Very little. We got much better tools for seeing inside people.
That's exactly.
But we still
right.
we still always use it because
I
it's a
know.
laying on of hands and people. It's an expectation.
It is. I mean, I remember being in NP school and they were basically like, you don't ever see a patient not lay your stethoscope on them.
And that's why.
It wasn't until years later I was like, is this really necessary every time?
No, it's not. It's
not,
necessary for the
me.
building of that sacred bond.
Right, that's
between
right.
the healer and the he or she who comes to be healed.
Yeah.
And, that we still utilize magic.
Yeah.
It's in the form of a prescription pad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's healing magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the problem is that when we look at older individuals, this model starts to break down. Because if we look at the most common, disease processes, that I see in people over the age of 75 or so, what are they? Well, number one is arthritis. And then we have things like hypertension, atherosclerotic disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic kidney disease, eyes and ears failing, depression, dementia, the list goes on. But how many of these disease processes are amenable to this model of we intercede and we move it and they return to who they were pre-morbid?
Yeah, I know that's not what it's about.
Exactly, because the medical issues of aging are not, for the most part, acute disease. They are chronic disease.
Yeah.
And therefore cannot be removed from the body no matter what you do. That doesn't mean you can't make people feel better or reduce symptoms or various other things. You can do all
of that. You can mitigate all of it,
but you can't remove it.
You can't remove it. It's there to stay.
Yeah. There's one exception to that categorically in the common disease of aging, and that's depression. You can actually, if you treat depression properly, restore someone to who they were physiologically prior to the development of the disease process. But that's the only category of common aging diseases where that works.
Yeah.
The problem is that we have built our healthcare system entirely around the acute care model of treatment. And what happens when you take someone whose issues are all chronic and treat them with nothing but acute care treatments?
It's chaos.
Exactly. You can make someone a whole lot worse. And anybody who's ever worked in the modern medical system has seen the 85-year-old come into the emergency room with something really simple, and by the time we're done with it 3 weeks later,
it's awful.
they'll never go home and be able to take care of themselves.
That's right.
Again.
And caregivers and family members have all seen it. You've all seen your loved one go to the hospital and they come home and you're like, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
Things are not better. Happens all the time.
Yeah. And it's because of this way that the system is built. And this is put into place by Medicare. Because we think of Medicare as being an all-encompassing healthcare program for older individuals, but it is not.
No. Yeah.
Medicare was designed to allow an older individual access to the healthcare system to treat their acute illness.
AKA to be able to go to the hospital.
Exactly.
Be able to go to the emergency room.
Because that was the piece that was missing in the early 1960s. We weren't thinking about lots of 80-year-olds with CHF and COPD and chronic kidney disease. They didn't exist.
Yep.
Because they would have died of their acute illness that could have been treated had they access long before they got to that point.
Right.
So this is the central dilemma of what we're dealing with now in terms of, geriatric medicine. And the difference between, a good internist and a geriatrician is that the geriatrician understands this. And the geriatrician knows that that acute care model falls apart when you're trying to deal with an older person. Yeah. And the reason it falls apart is because it assumes that patients exist in some sort of vacuum.
Yeah.
And people do not live in vacuums.
Yeah.
They live lives. And by the time they're older, they have had decades to shape that life to themselves. And that life includes their family structure and, their physical home and how they do things and all. It's multidimensional.
Yeah, absolutely.
And often the key issue in geriatrics is that this individual that you are treating no longer fits because of the changes of their chronic illnesses into that life that they have created for themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Dementia being the most classic example.
Sure.
And if you cannot change who they are because of the chronic illnesses and the limitations, just shoving them back into this life that doesn't fit them anymore doesn't make anything better.
It's not fair to them.
No.
People think it's, but Mom, I know she'd want to stay in her home, or I know she'd want, well, it's not.
Of course, but, that may not be, realistic given everything that's going on.
Right.
So the geriatrician says, if I cannot fix things in terms of that individual, I have to look at the life. How do I rejigger this life to bring it back into balance with who they are rather than who they were?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the kind of the chief difference between how a geriatrician thinks and how an internist thinks.
Yep. Absolutely. 100%.
Yep. So that's that. So we've now done age, we've done the doctoring. So we're going to go back into history again a little bit, but we're not going back to the 1870s.
Okay.
We're going to go to the United States between the wars. Okay. Because that's where we start to really get our sense of how the healthcare system should be, is that 1920s, 1930s period. Because that's where we start to develop a common media image of life through movies and photography and that. So we all kind of know what that looked like.
Yeah.
What does the healthcare system look like in that period? Do we have doctors? Of course we do. Who are they? They're almost exclusively male. They're almost exclusively white. And this is thanks to some overt sexism and racism baked into what is known as the Flexner Report of 1910, which reformed medical education in this country.
And that still carries on today.
Oh.
Not that the majority of providers are male and white, but I think the
Actually,
image,
they're a minority now.
yeah, but I think the image is, and
doctors are men and nurses are women.
And as a nurse practitioner, when I've worked with male nurse practitioners, people have assumed that was the doctor I worked with, you know.
They are, in general, members of the community that they serve.
Mm-hmm.
You know, each town or neighborhood, usually there's a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
You can usually spot which one was the doctor's house if you walk through a neighborhood built between about 1910 and 1930. Because there's something architecturally different about it. It has 2 front doors. One for social and one into the consulting rooms. They didn't work in an office downtown.
Yeah.
They worked in the neighborhood, and then they loaded up the Model T or the dog cart, and they went off and did their rounds.
Oh my gosh, there are tons of houses in Birmingham that look like that.
Yeah. You know, lawyers, you know, and other professionals would have houses like that too.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was very, very common in doctors to have, you know, that double front door set up.
Yeah.
This was, you know, the period of the Depression and that. So this is where we get this idea of the doctor paid in chickens and things like that. Because, you know, they were members of a community. A community supported them, and they supported the community.
Right.
Majority of them are GPs. I mean, they know a little bit about a whole lot, but they're not specialists.
Right.
You know, and they're, for the most part, they don't have all the modern toys, but they're pretty dang good doctors. Yeah. I mean, they know what to do, you know, with the tools they have available. You know, and even when there's not much they can do, they teach about how to properly nurse somebody in the home. Because if you're medically ill in this period, you were taken care of at home.
Right.
You were not in the hospital.
Right.
You know, do we have hospitals? We do. But hospitals have very limited role and very limited ways in which they are used. If you think of the names of hospitals, that tells you who owned them. They were not owned by corporate entities.
Yeah.
They were owned by religious organizations with a public service mission. They were owned by, you know, public political entities, counties, cities, hospital boards, and that for public good. Basically, they're all owned by not-for-profit entities for the good of the public.
Yeah.
You know, there are some that are owned by like a collaboration of local physicians, you know, the doctor's hospital or whatever. There are a few that are privately owned, but they're pretty few and far between. You know, they become famous, like the Brothers Mayo opened this little one in Rochester, Minnesota.
Yeah.
And what the hospitals do is very limited. You know, this is about a generation or two after Joseph Lister and the development of aseptic surgery. So they can do surgery, and they actually can do it relatively well. They can take out your gallbladder, they can fix your broken hip, they can do your mastectomy, and all of these kinds of things. So they exist for surgery. They exist to separate people who might be a danger to the greater community. Mental asylums, TB sanitariums, things of this type. They exist to train the next generation of, you know, physicians and nurses. And they exist to take care of those who do not have intact family structures who can take care of them at home. Basically, almost like a hospice. You know, you come in, they'll keep you clean, they'll keep you fed, and you're either going to get better or you're not.
Oh my gosh, how times have changed.
But that's what hospitals did.
Yeah.
You know,
it was a public service.
Yeah. It was, you know, a very, very different world and very, very different goals. And this is what is true up until World War II. And in World War II, we have something very different again happening. You know, big spasm that changes everything. What happens here is millions of young American bodies are shipped overseas. And some of them come back diseased. You know, they get wounded, they pick up a weird disease in the tropics, you know, but they come back. These are young, healthy people who have pathology. And as we are not under bombardment in World War II with intact infrastructure, American physicians in hospitals learned very quickly, as they were dealing with young, healthy people, about how to really deal better with making people better. And we leapfrogged forward with pathology. And at the same time, this chemical that had been sitting around since the 1920s, originally found by Alexander Fleming on an old orange, the penicillium mold, which had been recognized as being an antibiotic back in the early 30s, was first used actually to treat conjunctivitis in newborns.
Yeah.
But nobody knew how to synthesize it in any quantity, so that was the thing. And when it became clear that this was a really great antibiotic and killed all kinds of bacteria that did all kinds of things, and it was becoming a game changer in the war effort, because the thing that has always killed in the troops is not so much the battle injuries as the infections in the battle, injuries after the battle.
Right.
And so, what they had to do is they would give it to the troops, they would get better, then they would have to basically collect everybody's urine and strain it and recycle it.
Good.
Yeah, that's what they were doing in the early 1940s. And eventually, by I think it was like 1942 or something, they cracked the code about how can we synthesize this in quantity in the laboratory, and antibiotics became common as part of the reason why, the Allies were able to win World War II, was because they had this more than Germany had it, because Germany was being pounded into the rubble. And so we emerged from World War II.
Coming soon, part 2 of Aging Uncensored's The History of Medicare with Dr. Andrew Duxbury.